Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I know there's a lot more folks who are planning on joining us, and so as they come in, our host will take care of that. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. It's hosted by the Goucher College MA in Historic Preservation Program. I am Melanie Lytle. I direct the program. I'm also the Assistant Professor of Practice in Historic Preservation here at Goucher. I am delighted that you could join us. We're going to have a fantastic turnout for this topic today. I would ask that you kindly mute your microphones to limit any accidental interruptions. The talk today is part of our 2025 to 2026 academic year series that's featuring the scholarship of our Goucher graduates. And today we'll be hearing from Bennett King, who recently earned his historic preservation degree from us. Just a few quick notes for everyone's comfort. Closed captioning is available. You can click on the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We are recording this, so if you prefer not to be on the screen, just turn off your video or don't speak up during the Q&A. Please, as I said, keep your microphone on mute until we open it up to questions and comments. You're also encouraged to communicate with each other and the speaker using our chat function. I ask you begin by posting something about who you are and why you're here. And then you can also post your questions in the chat throughout this conversation. If this is the first that you have heard of Goucher and our MA in Historic Preservation program, I want to briefly introduce you. The students who are drawn to our Historic Preservation program are particularly interested in working with historic places like buildings and landscapes and neighborhoods to help communities thrive. And the Goucher program is designed for professionals and it's primarily online. We have a brief annual residency each summer. All of our faculty are working in the field. They bring extensive experience and their networks into our classrooms, and we have a flexible curriculum that allows students to pursue their various interests. Joining us today, mostly behind the scenes, is Taylor Seitzinger. She is our graduate admissions counselor. She's also a great resource about the admissions process if you are considering pursuing a degree in historic preservation here at Goucher. She and I are always happy to talk with you, help you determine if the program may be a good fit for you. So don't hesitate to reach out. With that, let's move on to why you are all here. I'm delighted to have Bennett King with us as our speaker. I have asked Ben to speak with you for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and then I'll address them as they come up during the Q&A. Ben's also happy to answer any questions about his experience at Goucher if you're considering graduate study, so feel free to ask those questions too. Ben came to us with a bachelor's degree in history from California State University, Fresno, and then earned his Master of Arts from us recently. And over the past 3 years, he has been working with government agencies and nonprofit projects, organizations on preservation-related projects. He's been collaborating with planners and advocates and community members to document and interpret and protect both tangible and intangible cultural heritage. His background is in human-centered design, which has really informed his approach to preservation. It's grounded in careful listening and understanding how people interact with place. And today he's going to be focusing on preserving cultures and places for the people who live within them. So with that, let's get started. Ben, the room is yours.
Thanks, Melanie. That I almost didn't recognize who that was in the introduction. That was wonderful. I didn't know I was doing all that stuff. Sounds great. So I'll go ahead and share my slides and we'll get started here real quick. And Melanie, maybe you can just tell me if you can see. Okay. Can you see that all right?
All looks well.
Okay. So welcome everybody to the culmination of my thesis project. This is my legacy business. We're going to be talking about my legacy business toolkit, program toolkit, and then I'll show you some of the toolkit as well. This toolkit came from interviews with practitioners. I think I saw the DC Preservation League on here, who was one of the contributors to this, and extensive research through existing programs throughout the US that are currently ongoing. The toolkit's available to everybody online. It will be a living toolkit. It also has inputs for anybody that uses it to provide information of programs they're running or things that they'd like to see in the toolkit. So please, if you do take a look at it, I'd love you to contribute to it. Okay, so a little bit of the background. Melanie told you a little bit about what I'm doing, but I started my journey in historic preservation in a small business. I used to go to this art gallery in San Diego called La Bodega, which is a one of the art galleries that focuses on uh, Hispanic and Mexican artwork in an area that is traditionally been underserved. These galleries kind of help to keep that community going, and they've actually created the sense of place of that community. This Barrio Logan has been faced with gentrification, and this gallery actually closed about 5 years ago now, I think 4 or 5 years ago. And that's what made me think that, why aren't we preserving things like this? It wasn't the building, as you can see here, is not particularly special, but the gallery was. And that kind of led me to this journey of thinking about preservation more as cultural heritage. And that's how I ended up starting my master's. A little background on why I did legacy businesses. I owned my own small business for about 6.5 years before I started my master's. And I also grew up in a family farm that was a California Century farm, which we lost a few years back due to a lack of succession planning. So I'm keenly aware of the challenges that these legacy businesses fix or face. And so I wanted to help create something that could help fix that. So if you're unfamiliar with the term legacy business, you're in good company. It's relatively new term being used in preservation and city planning. Just this is one definition for it. Legacy businesses are commonly described as long-standing businesses that have been operating in the same community for an extended amount of time, and they contribute in some way to that community. The amount of time that defines a legacy business is different throughout the programs in the U.S., but it's usually 20 years or more. Of the legacy business programs I interviewed and surveyed and researched while I was compiling this toolkit, small to medium-sized, independently owned businesses were the target for legacy business programs. Large chains and industrial businesses are generally considered out of scope for these programs. Oop, going the wrong way. So why are they important? Well, first of all, they connect generations to shared history and culture. Legacy businesses often embody a community's traditions by continuing local skills or crafts, transferring generational knowledge, and sharing local stories. They've been businesses for so long that they've developed clientele throughout their years of operation. So they become a cultural resource that connect multiple generations of local residents. These businesses often serve as social gathering places too. They promote local music and art and act as community centers for those communities they're in. Because of this, they foster a sense of place and place attachment to these communities, giving residents a shared sense of pride and a connection and familiarity, a connection or familiarity, and a sense of continuity in the community. They help neighborhoods retain their unique character even as the neighborhood gentrifies or redevelops. Legacy businesses are community-centric and often family-owned, so they help stabilize local neighborhood economies and keep money circulating inside the community generally, as they tend to hire locals and create local supply chains. They often provide stable jobs, develop skills, and provide knowledge and mentorship for workers, sometimes across multiple generations. They contribute in these local communities by reducing unemployment rates and maybe narrowing employment disparities that you see in some of these neighborhoods. I would also say that these tend to be what are referred to as third places. These third places are defined as informal gathering spaces where people gather outside of work or home. These can be public spaces like these legacy businesses, um, and they actually provide this invaluable community sense of bonding or community sense of interaction. They'd help develop the local identity and again foster that shared sense of place. Now, I just wanted to pause for a second to talk about the oversized importance of legacy businesses in BIPOC, immigrant, and ethnic communities. In these communities, they provide authenticity in a world that's often changing around the communities. They're a continuous thread providing witness to the history of the community for multiple generations. The goods and services in these communities, especially, are provided by these locally owned legacy businesses, are often geared towards the believed tastes and practices of the communities they serve. This is particularly relevant because mainstream or big commercial stores often lack the goods and services desired or needed by minority or by BIPOC or immigrant communities. Music and art are often highly localized in these communities, and these legacy businesses tend to sponsor them or host or showcase them. They also stabilize, as I mentioned before, they stabilize the local economy and create localized job opportunities, especially in immigrant communities where those might not be available elsewhere. And just talking about that a little bit, try to envision this. There are certain businesses whose very name infers their cultural significance in a BIPOC immigrant or ethnic community. The corner deli, the bodega, beauty salon, barbershop, carniceria, crab shack, these help you form an image in your mind's eye that may include a place, a region, a culture, an ethnicity, and in some case, an importance that is based on the type of business. And they help you define that sense of place in your mind. As we look to preserve and protect our cultural heritage, these are the types of businesses, especially in their community of origin, that are vital components. So if we want to talk about preserving legacy businesses, then we first need to understand the problems they face. This is not an extensive list that I've created. These are the most common problems I've found across my research. The problems, if you look to create your own legacy business program, you should tailor the needs to your community. So find the problems that are in your community, but you can use these as kind of a starting place. Let's talk about the first one. Municipal disinvestment. Because the age of legacy businesses, many sit in communities or neighborhoods that face a reduction or elimination in public funding services or services that has taken place over time. This could come from anything from budget issues to inequitable public policy. The reason for disinvestments are complex. It can come from budget cuts, loss of tax base, or deferred maintenance. This leads to substandard infrastructure and public services in these commercial areas of these neighborhoods, and negative perceptions of a neighborhood might come from that, stemming from the inadequate public services in those neighborhoods. It can lead to less business traffic and even supply chain issues, which threaten the sustainability of legacy businesses. So gentrification is kind of a touchy word, but it's not necessarily detrimental to legacy businesses. It can lead to reversals in community disinvestment and create increased patronage and revenues. However, it also poses significant challenges to legacy businesses due to rising costs and shifting customer bases. As neighborhoods revitalize, outside investors are attracted to redevelopment opportunities in these neighborhoods. The goals of those developers may not align with the community priorities, resulting in redevelopment that has fewer and smaller commercial spaces available. And this makes it harder for legacy businesses to find new locations if they are displaced. When gentrification and redevelopment occur, legacy businesses are often pushed out due to increased property taxes, supply costs, insurance, or rising rents. So those are something to keep in mind. As a neighborhood redevelops or revitalizes, it's important to remember the significance of legacy businesses to the community's overall cultural heritage, and your efforts to preserve them may or may not involve the building they are in. So because of this, this provides the opportunity for you to look at other opportunities for relocation as a viable option. You don't have to necessarily still save the building as long as you provide the spaces for the legacy business. Another issue they face is when remodeling or adding new services because of adapting to changing communities. These legacy businesses often need capital or money, and they struggle to obtain it. Banks or lenders tend to view older or disinvested areas as a community of higher risk for investment, making it difficult for some legacy business owners to secure loans or lines of credit. Keep in mind that limited access to capital can it can impact BIPOC or immigrant communities more. I'll just skip that word since I couldn't get it out. And then finally here, as their market changes, many businesses that have been doing business a certain way for decades are caught off guard or unfamiliar with the operational changes need to compete. This doesn't mean that there's an unwillingness to change in these businesses, so there's an opportunity for your program to provide services that can help them remain competitive. One of the biggest issues that came up as a surprise to me was the number of legacy businesses that closed their doors due to a lack of succession planning. In my work in Arlington, Virginia, we already have seen three businesses close in 2 years because of this. Business owners may be too busy to plan for their eventual retirement or succession, or they may lack the family or staff to pass the business on to. Another prime opportunity for your legacy business program if you're looking to build one. So what is a legacy business program and how can they help? Legacy business programs are relatively new concepts and they're not widespread. I would say there's probably under 30 existing nationwide right now. This is a description that I think fits well from the Small Business Anti-Displacement Network. They frame legacy business programs as initiatives designed to preserve longtime businesses that contribute to a neighborhood's history, identity, or character. And they celebrate the time-tested local mom and pop restaurants, shops, and cultural economic anchors of their community. The first U.S. legacy business program, and arguably the most comprehensive, was started only in 2016. San Francisco's Legacy Business Program is a local government program dedicated to preserving long-running businesses that contribute to the fiber of their communities. The rapid gentrification of San Francisco has displaced much of the lower and middle class and the small businesses that serve them, especially in minority communities. Recognizing this problem, the Legacy Business Program emphasizes financial assistance, especially rent stabilization and rental assistance. The Legacy Business Program in San Francisco interlinks the city and the county of San Francisco, public and private small business services, and advocacy groups to create the tools and infrastructure for retaining local businesses that create the sense of place and character in San Francisco. So businesses in this program have to be at least 30 years old and show a contribution to their communities. I want you to keep in mind that unlike other small businesses or preservation programs, these legacy business initiatives are about more than just the building or the business. At their core, they're about preserving the stories, the cultural heritage, the traditions, as well as the community connections that occur in these businesses. So that sense of place and that character of the community, remaining in a community, is there for generations to come, and that should be something we focus on in our preservation as well as our current areas of focus. So, what do legacy business programs offer? There's no one-size-fits-all list of services that legacy business programs offer. They're generally tailored to the needs of the individual community and the capabilities of the groups that are running them. Legacy business programs offer everything from grants to local recognition, business training, technical assistance, branding, and succession planning. Some programs also work with local landlords to ensure that commercial space remains available for the local businesses. But by necessity, these programs are generally cross-functional. They complementing existing municipal programs that exist in the cities already, as they require the expertise and assistance from the people in these groups that are small business programs. They come from civic associations, historic preservation organizations, the economic development programs, that type of thing. Oh, also this requires local policymakers and elected officials. I should mention that. That's kind of a key factor to it. There we go. So let's talk about some of those areas of support. Start first with business support. As I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list, but we'll just talk about some of the ones that are ongoing nationally. In business support, offering this is the most common one, is offering marketing and promotional support. So if you are working from a civic group or from a municipal government, the idea is to help them with their marketing or promote the businesses, just get the word out that these businesses exist and why they're important. This is where a lot of legacy business programs start. Also providing legal support or municipal policy support. This means helping them to understand everything from rent and leases and municipal policies and zoning issues. Training and mentorship, gets to the idea of, a lot of these businesses may face change and they may not understand how that happens. So there are many of these programs throughout the U.S. that offer training and mentorship programs to help them succeed. And the last one is succession planning, helping these businesses. One of the best ones comes from Miami, from the Alapata Collaborative, where they actually have a entrepreneur program for legacy businesses that do not have maybe a family member or employee that they can pass the business on to. Young entrepreneurs can train in the business and then have a way of taking them over. So succession planning is a great thing to add to business support. Okay, so let's talk about economic support. When we talk about this, um, a lot of legacy business, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of legacy business owners do not own their buildings. So we have to take this as a two-part approach for economic support. So you think about this as the tenants themselves and the business owner, or the building owner, I'm sorry. They could be the same. So there could be multiple offerings you have, but in general, you would want to have uh, economic support for the business owner and then the building owner. So on the business tenant side, there are things like grants, rent or lease assistance, and then capital or tax support programs, or I should say tax initiatives. On the building owner side, again, grants for improving the building, tax support there, or preservation incentives if the building qualifies. And then the final one, we're going to glance over this in one slide, but this is probably the most complex group to implement. And, uh, and that's probably one of the reasons that legacy business programs are not as widespread. Implementing these requires cross-functional municipal support and generally backing from elected officials. Implementing these policies does provide the most impact for your legacy business program in the long term and guarantees that the program will continue to succeed despite changes in local politics. A lot of this stuff is in the toolkit, so I'll show you these now and we can get into it in the toolkit, and you can visit the toolkit later and go through some of these things. So who starts a legacy business program? The quick answer is anyone who has the interest or the capacity. I'm guessing if you're on this call, you're that person, so you can start one of these programs. They're often established by community groups first or preservation organizations. Local governments do start some of them and then run them, but they're usually a grassroots effort, and oftentimes the most successful ones start maybe with a preservation group or a community group, and then are passed on to the government as they grow. So although establishing a legacy business program is time consuming and complex, any organization, like I mentioned, can initiate the program. Regardless of who initiates the process, a legacy business program requires collaboration across multiple areas of expertise, including funding, zoning, policy, community engagement, and economic resources. Because of the complexity behind these programs, most official legacy business programs are managed by local governments. However, nonprofits and community groups can and do play a significant role in many areas of these programs, such as initiating the program, identifying businesses for the program, generating community support, promoting the businesses, and securing private funding. Um, I should also mention that many of these programs, because this is historic preservation specific talk, many of these programs, most of these programs have historic preservationists working on them in some manner. Some of the programs actually are run by the historic, like San Antonio's is run by the Historic Preservation Group there. Other ones start from preservation advocacy groups or are run by preservation advocacy groups. This picture here, you can see Long Beach Heritage actually started their legacy business program, and it's now been passed on to the Long Beach city officials. And that was the same in San Francisco as well. So how is a legacy business started? A good first step is to connect with a small community-centered nonprofit organization or a civic group, as they provide pathways for community collaboration. They also have connections to local government. They may have some access to small funding. All of these are the crucial elements you'll need in the early phases of a legacy business program. I want you to note, though, that you don't need a significant amount of funding to take your first steps. So this is a picture of the People and Places Legacy Business Project that I've been working on in Arlington, Virginia, with the Langston Boulevard Alliance. This is an ongoing oral history and promotional project for legacy businesses that was funded by just a small grant from the County of Arlington. So you can start small with the promotional side of it, and then work from there. So I do have some steps to follow if you're starting a legacy business program. Um, let's start with the first is collaborate with community groups and representatives to gain a deeper understanding of which types of businesses are most significant in the community and why they're significant. So determine the businesses that matter. Once you do that, you have to quantify, or I'm sorry, qualify the businesses. So know the type of businesses that are significant. Once you know those types, you can determine which businesses qualify and what those qualifications are. Again, you should be working with the community to determine the metrics for qualification and any guidance for submission of these legacy businesses. Then use community input to create the initial list of businesses that you should target for your program. Work with the legacy businesses once you've identified them in your neighborhood to develop an understanding of the problems and the threats that they're facing. I showed you the list earlier, but you can find other ones in your community that may not be on that list. This will help you prioritize and then shape your program as you start to grow it. To the best of your ability, you want to quantify and qualify the impact and value of the legacy business program that's bringing it to your community or to your government. Um, you also want to determine do these businesses support local traditions? Do they support the local economy? Do they support art and music? These are the types of things you'll help be telling or promoting as you pass this on to a government or grow the program. Um, I think probably the biggest one that we've seen is, or we've in Arlington, the one we hear the most is, how does it help economically? So if you can figure out, work with your city government to see what the preservation of these legacy businesses would do for the local economy, or at least give some maybe ROI, I think is what most of them are looking for. Okay, so then you need to start working with the local officials. So collaborate with the city. This is a crucial first step to success of your program. You'll need their support and buy-in from the outset. Share the outcome of the first four steps that we just showed with the city and outline the importance of the businesses to the community. Use the stories of the people that you've collected. These can help you sell the program, but more than anything is the human story. And since the growing the legacy business program rarely fits into an existing municipal program. So explaining these stories and showing the value to the community is a great way of starting these type of programs with a city that's maybe not used to them. Next one is mitigating opposition. So identify which groups and organizations may be a part of the legacy business program in the future. These could be a planning department, economic development, historic preservation, so on. There's many programs in your local area. Share the findings of your project with these groups early to answer any questions they might have and garner any initial support. And emphasize that your project does not have funding or staffing impact on theirs. That's a key thing to emphasize early. These conversations will help you mitigate any future opposition to the project and open up alternative pathways for funding in the future. And then the last one is generating support. So get the word out to your community early and often. Use your social media channels, your websites, and email lists to promote the project, to promote the businesses. In my work with Langston Boulevard Alliance, the initial public support that we got on just doing a few of the early oral history programs and promoting some of the early legacy businesses actually got us another round of funding and let us continue the program for another couple of years. So that's a great way to grow the program is by generating early support. So with that, I'll show you the link here. We'll come back to this too, but I wanted to go off to the website and show you some of the toolkit. And hang on just a second, let me get over there. Okay, so this is the toolkit. It's available at cmppreservation.com. You can see it's organized here. Depending on how you're coming into this, if you're new to legacy businesses or legacy business programs, there's some sections here that went through some of the information I shared with you. But if you're already maybe farther along or you understand these processes more, you can get right into things like the economic support or policy in the legislature. Um, there's also sections on how do you grow your legacy business program, how do you sustain it, and then I also have another section just specifically for historic preservation. But if you look at some of this, let's go to economic support for one here. So these are also broken into subsections. As I mentioned before, you need to look at the tenants and the building owners. So I've given some information. I've given pages on, what are the grants you can provide here. There's some examples from some of the ones that are ongoing now. There's also some of these have worksheets or steps that you can follow. Let's go to I also, this section on sustainability, this is once you've created your program, how can you grow it? So this has got some, like just some section. Let's go here to how do you create an organizational structure? I've got some sections in here. There's a toolbox for you to use too. Many of these pages will have external resources that you can use. This is kind of how you create, this is a checklist or how you create your organization. This is downloadable as well. So there's tools like this in there for you to use. And for those of you that are interested in historic preservation, we have what I've created here is some ways to frame legacy business programs because they don't fit easily into the current or historic preservation frameworks. How can you discuss these maybe with your leaders? There is some talk here about historic districts where they are, but also how can they be used with emerging trends, traditional cultural properties or ethnic enclaves. Just some examples that are given there. Um, I think probably I'll stop there, Melanie. There's a lot of pages here. It goes on, and I don't think we need to go through all of it. You guys can go through yourself, but I'll put that website up again real quick. So you guys want to maybe if you want to grab that and put it in the chat too. But this is the link to the website for you guys to look at yourself. You can email me too if you have any questions, and also please do contribute as you go through it. So with that, I'll just thank you, and then I can stop sharing, and we can talk a little bit more.
Thank you very much, Ben. I encourage you all to go to the website. Ben has just scratched the surface of the content there. There is an enormous amount of resources. It is organized in such a way that, regardless of who you are, sort of your role in potentially being part of a legacy business, you will have the tools to be able to make it happen. So it's really a fantastic resource, Ben. Well done.
Okay, thanks.
I know there's going to be some questions that come in over the next while, and while we wait for those, I will start with one of mine, which
Okay.
is, you have said many times that you chose to study at Goucher because we teach historic preservation from a community-based perspective and one that emphasizes people first.
Mhm.
And I would say that throughout your studies, you really tested our framework and our practices to see how far we can take that. And this Legacy Business Toolkit seems like the culmination of that. So when you decided you wanted to use legacy businesses as your topic, it meant that you had to fulsomely address historic preservation practices that more typically are emphasizing the material, the design, the place, rather than what is happening inside them. So why do you think this is so important that you make this case that the intangible heritage is as much our work as the tangible?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is true. I think when I started at Goucher, I came at it from much more the perspective of maybe cultural preservation than historic preservation. All throughout, I mean, much to the chagrin of some of the instructors at Goucher, I didn't emphasize the building as much as I emphasized the culture. I think just from my own experience and the way maybe I think, to me, it's about, I don't, it's not that I don't think the buildings are important, but I think it's important that we preserve our cultures and our communities as well. And a lot of these are longstanding. And if we start to lose some of the key components like legacy businesses, we'll have the shells of the buildings of a community that used to be there, right? I mean, these are the things that hold those communities together. And wouldn't we rather have them remain than to just have a sign that talks about what they used to be? I know Jackie's worked on, she's on here, she's worked on this with some of the immigrant communities that no longer exist, right? There's just a small component of them in a new regentrified neighborhood. And that's the kind of thing I think I'm trying to keep in place. Now, these are, I do think that these communities do evolve. And I think this gets into some of the, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, Melanie, but this gets into some of the newer thoughts in historic preservation, especially around like living heritage or people, you mentioned earlier, people centric preservation. And I think this is a key project that involves both of those. These communities do evolve, and we do want to allow them to evolve, but also preserve those links to the past. I think that's what makes a legacy business so important, is that they can cross multiple generations and kind of keep that continuity, the continuity there. So I think that's why I emphasize this. And hopefully that answered the question. If you want to add anything to that, Melanie, please let me know.
No, that's great. I'm starting to see some questions come in through the chat. So let's move that direction. Julie asks, where does opposition come from generally?
Everywhere. So, so it's, I shouldn't say that in a bad way. There's a lot of questions around this legacy business programs because they are so new. I think when from my own experience and from the people I talked with, as you're talking to, or as you're looking to involve the municipalities or your local government, um, a lot of times they're looking for, how has this worked elsewhere, or examples that, could work here. And this is a hard one. There is no one size fits all on a legacy business program. I know as we've been doing the work in Arlington, the question came up, well, what's worked elsewhere that will work in Arlington? Well, Arlington is completely different than San Francisco or San Antonio or any other, or even DC that's so close. So you have to create these as a one-off. Well, that's not something a lot of local governments are comfortable doing. They'd like to know it's going to be successful before they start, right? That's a challenge. You will find opposition within the community, but I think that's why it's so important to involve the community early. That will work out as soon as they start to see the stories or get involved. That opposition kind of drops off fairly quickly. And this opposition generally comes because maybe they feel like they haven't been supported by government programs in the past or these types of programs in the past. So that's why it's important to involve them and any government officials that you're going to be talking with or working with later on. You will find opposition because it's new, right? It's a new concept, and that could come from multiple angles. But I would also say most of the people I've talked to that are involved in this, or most of the programs that have been successful, it does take time, but it's overcome. This opposition is overcome.
I would add, Ben has identified all of the known legacy programs in the country, and uses them as examples throughout the whole toolkit. So, as you know, the San Francisco example that you provided, for instance, the Long Beach ones are only two out of a grand, like a lot of different examples that I think it was part of your intention with this toolkit to be able, for someone who wanted to start a legacy business, to be able to take this to their policymakers and others and say,
Yeah.
hey, we are not the first to do this. Yes, we're going to have to make this custom to our community and our needs, but this is an established concept. And here's, wow, look at this really
Yeah.
fulsome toolkit that has all of these tools for us to figure it out.
Yeah, that's a great point, Melanie. And there's like in the case of Portland, they're starting with a case study, right? So they're just doing research in their city to see how they could create their own program. Now they've looked at other ones too, but they're starting with like a localized case study. That's a great way to start, right? So these examples are all in the toolkit. There's different ways of starting. Um, Long Beach did start as just a promotional. A lot of them do just start as a promotional event. The one in Boston, I think, is an annual funding event. So it's a legacy businesses are get grants every year. So that's the way they started. There's different ways of approaching it, and I think I've collected most of them, I think, in the US.
Yeah, and I would say the toolkit also lays out those different levels of, like when you start to assess what might be right for your community, you can go to the toolkit and look at the different combinations of programming that may be most suitable. If you want to go big and all out, you've got all the resources in order to do that. But if you want to start small and test it out, you also have guidance in there about
Yeah,
that.
that's an important thing too. And there's a section of the toolkit too about scoping. How do you scope the project? And really should never take on more than your team can commit to.
Yeah.
And that should be starting small. Most people do start small, and that's almost all of the successful ones, with maybe the exception of San Antonio, which started a little bit larger. They all start in some small promotional way or a small grant or something like that. So it's a good way to start.
Zach says, a great presentation and work you've done in legacy businesses. I'd like to hear you expand a bit upon selling legacy business documentation and promotion within the field. In my experience, some preservationists have a hard time understanding why we should focus on small businesses, especially if a business is from, say, 1995.
Yeah, that's a great one. These new, Arlington, we faced that because I think we've moved ours to 20 years. So these can be relatively new businesses in the concept of legacy businesses. Um, how do you sell them to preservationists? I think that's this is old school preservation. Maybe it may not fit into that mold, right, Zach? I think that it would be, and I've talked, I guess I shouldn't mention that, but the historic HRBs or groups like that can be maybe of a certain mindset, right? So this doesn't fit in their mold. I think the better way to do it is to not sell it to just a preservation, but to sell it to kind of the different groups in the city. Preservationists will come along, I think, when they see the value, or if you can sell maybe the concepts of living heritage, or like we talked about, living heritage or people-centered preservation. Maybe you can start by selling that to preservationists you're dealing with. But I think at the end of the day, this comes down to economics. And as much as I don't want to say that, it does. Most of these governments want to see how is this going to affect how is it going to affect the local, like a tax base in a community or a neighborhood? How's this going to keep businesses there and keep jobs there? And that's the type of thing you have to do some projection on, or you have to get some help from your economic development, uh, whatever group that you have in your local area to see what they're working on and how that's helped. Um, I That doesn't answer the preservationist side, but I think the more people that get on board with that type of thing, then the preservationists will come along. And Zach, you can email me if you want, if that didn't answer your question.
Yeah, and I would say everybody should go to that historic preservation tab on the toolkit that in which Ben has begun to address the types of questions that are likely to come up within the historic preservation field itself.
And there are ways to talk about it mentioned there
Yeah.
too. So maybe that'll help with
Carrie says great work. She's just sent it to her economic development director. So let's
that.
see what happens down
Great
there.
place to start.
Yeah. Amy says, I definitely appreciate your comments around the importance of succession planning. My family is currently working with a small business succession planning consultant to help us move fully from third to fourth generation and beyond. Does your toolkit provide specific recommendations for what small businesses need to consider in succession planning or offer connections to professionals in small business succession planning?
The toolkit does not address it specifically, but there are links to external resources that do. So that's a lot of the toolkit is, whether it's through government, programs or other resources. There's a lot of links in the toolkit. So I didn't write them specifically, but I have some links on that.
Yeah. Anne says, great presentation, Bennett. Could you provide a few examples of preservation incentives and or municipal tax incentives to create a legacy business program? Did you find these incentives are essential for programs?
Yeah, the preservation one, are they essential in the long run? Yes. To start, no, you don't necessarily need to have those. But so here's this is just from my experience. This is one of the things we learned in Arlington is we started with this promotional program, the People and Places Project. You know, the businesses love it, the community loves it. But when you talk to the legacy businesses, they're like, we need access to, we want some tax relief, we want some grant programs. They would like, that's what in the end, those types of things will help them. The preservation one is tough. It's hard to get. And look, here, I should take that back. Any preservation incentives come locally. You generally won't find them at a state or national level because these don't necessarily qualify for those requirements yet. And hopefully you can change that. But locally, you can work with your preservation group to see if there are incentives that can be created for legacy businesses. More than likely, you will find them from your local small business administration or whatever that's called in your neighborhood or the economic development group in your area. They can either put together a grant program or there is a grant program. I would also recommend, and this is in the toolkit as well, I would recommend looking at local. Often it's small banks or credit unions have community funds or community grants, and those types of incentives can be, you can work with them to focus those on a legacy business grant. Um, it won't come through the way that we think of funding from historic preservation. It's generally not going to come from there unless this business is in a historic district. You'll have to have creative ways of creating preservation funding from elsewhere.
Yeah, and I would say your toolkit has gone to great lengths to identify all of those potential types of programs so that all of you who are interested in starting one of these don't have to start completely fresh. You can take a look at his suggested list and see what's available in your community. Jose says, great presentation. Love the resources link to SBAN and Dr. Morton's PAS memo on the resources page. Kate says, in the absence of a city adopting a program to support legacy businesses, what can preservation nonprofits do to support the cause? A nonprofit that I volunteer with started an awards program to recognize legacy restaurants and businesses, but I wish we could do more.
Yeah, and what you're doing is exactly what People in Places is. That's a nonprofit. Langston Boulevard Alliance is a nonprofit. That's the program I've been working on. And I think the next step there, I don't know when it necessarily is going to happen, is to work with. We have got some interest and a lot of cooperation from the local small business administration group there. And I think they're trying to look at what next steps are, whether this moves on with the county or not. I think make those connections in the city. Um, they can help you identify some possible next steps. There are grants. I did put some links to grants you can get. I know grant writing is not a lot of fun for everybody, but you can get grants to expand your project and move on to the next steps, which are listed in there. What are some possible next steps in the toolkit? So I would be creative in, how you find your funding. I would involve the city or find some allies in the city and work with them to see what next steps are. From my personal experience, this with the People in Places project, having those human stories and showing those and showing how the community um, gets behind those stories and supports those stories and supports the project is a pretty powerful tool to leverage politicians, especially. They like they like to get photos taken with a community that's happy. That once you get somebody that's an ally like that, they can be a powerful next step for you.
And again, I feel like a broken record, but if you'll go to the toolkit and discover that he's organized some of this information by the role that you play. So if you're representing a nonprofit, you can find some information there about how you and your organization may be able to pull this off.
Yeah, and keep in mind that's where most of them start. So you're off to a good start, and that's most of the ones have started that way. So keep up the good work.
Deborah says, I hope this recorded presentation can be available so I can share it with some of our local politicians who still do not get it. Yeah, we are recording, Deborah. Everyone who registered will receive the recording afterwards, and you're welcome to share that on. I will do my best to get it up on our YouTube channel too. Elsa says, this is great. The toolkit also seems like a great overview on how to push our existing preservation frameworks for more people-centered approaches, businesses or not. Are you finding that successful legacy business programs lead to more recognition in preservation programs, local, national listings, or is that beyond the point?
I don't know if it's beyond the point. I don't, but I also don't think it necessarily does. It may be local listings. Maybe it leads to a change in local listings and more local listings. I think that's probably a fair statement. Does it change anything at the state or national level? Not yet. Hopefully it, that's hopefully where the change will come from. I can see state ones changing faster, maybe, right? Because you start to get more legacy business programs. But I also don't think, like I mentioned before this, I really had to get outside of the mindset of just historic preservation and making this is such a group effort that maybe it's about we take preservation to a bigger level and say we're thinking about cultural preservation, not necessarily the preservation of a specific place. And that mean, like I mentioned before, that may mean that we're not necessarily worried about the buildings, and we just want to keep the business in the area, in the community. So I don't think it's necessarily it hasn't led to big changes yet, although I think San Francisco is probably a good example where there's a lot more. I think in their program, they have to qualify for local preservation, and then that's part of the step. So maybe, that's a great way to look at it. I would recommend looking at their program. It's the most comprehensive, and there's a lot of that information online.
Jackie says, I'm curious about legacy businesses within immigrant communities in particular. At least within many Asian communities, the goal is for one's children to not inherit the business, but to gain enough education to get a higher paying job. Have you found that business owners without a succession plan are open to passing on their business to younger entrepreneurs? Is there a sense that there is value in creating that continuity?
That's a great point, Jackie. I think I'll use one of the examples where I mentioned three closed in Arlington. Um, she did not want to pass it on to a younger generation. She didn't want them to have to do that work. But I think it was such a valuable. Uh, it was a Filipino market there. It was such a valuable component of the community. I think there could have been somebody that would have picked up that mantle, or she could have put it out there and somebody would have picked up the mantle. But I don't think she even knew about that process or thought about that process. So I think it's more about this is why I mentioned Alipata is that they've created a program where somebody that wants to own a small business or an entrepreneur can come in and learn the business and take it over. That's one of the rare examples. I haven't seen a lot of those in the US. But I think it's an education component. I think there's like I said earlier, a lot of these businesses they don't want necessarily the next generation taken on, or they're not even having time to think about it. And so as part of your program, if you're helping to say, hey, look, educate them as well and say this business is a key component of our community. We need to keep it here, and we'd like to work with you to do that. I think helping them understand. A lot of them don't understand their value. That's the other thing I was amazed by is, they're just happy to have been in business. They're happy to be a part of the community. There's really a lot of these ones I've talked to are really embedded in the community and connected to the community, but still maybe don't understand how valuable they are. It's not a concept that's come around to them. So part of it is you educating them. So Jackie, get on that. I want you to solve that. Hopefully that's the Jackie I know.
I believe it is, yeah. Uh, Don asks, what land use zoning policies have been adopted that seem to
Ooh.
work to facilitate legacy business without a lot of capital outlay by smaller local governments that don't have a lot of funding? Great presentation.
Yeah, I would encourage you to go to Toolkit for there's a lot. There's a lot of examples I put in there on the types of zoning and land use you can do and change. Some of them, some of them can be just changing zoning to make I'll give you one example that doesn't have a lot of cost. Change a commercial zone to maybe limit the height so that it's only a two-story limit or a three-story limit. Well, that immediately is going to take out the big developers, right? And encourage smaller owners or keeping the building small and keeping the space small for legacy businesses. That's just one example, but there's a lot of them in the toolkit. And there's so many that I couldn't list them all, but I would recommend going and looking.
All right, well, we're getting to the end of our time, so I'm going to read one more comment from Derek. He said, "Thank you for an excellent presentation. I look forward to reviewing your toolkit. Here in St. Petersburg, Florida, the subject of legacy businesses was born out of the city's Historic Preservation Division, but later developed and adopted within the city's greenhouse, our Economic Development Office for assisting small businesses."
Yeah, that's I really think if you had a first partner you wanted to approach, it's them. Like, go to economic development. That's the first group or small business. If they're different, go to the small business group and the economic development group. They will be key partners. And as much as we don't like to think about it, it's all of this is about economics. So you've got to have that group working with you early.
Yeah. So just lastly, Ben, some final thoughts from you. Why is it so important that we adopt this toolkit, and what is next? Are we going to be hearing from you more so that everyone can start adopting this?
Well, I would say that I don't think of this as my toolkit. Like I said before, I think this is a living document. What's next is I would love for this to, I think I'll start reaching out to Main Street or small business and displacement. One of these groups that is already working in this space, and I'd love to hand this off. Like I would love to give all this information to them that's already been compiled so that it can be used maybe at a bigger scope. I do want this to get to a bigger audience. Um, and it's a space that I love working in. I'd love to keep working on this. Will continue to try to work with other communities to help develop legacy business programs. I do think my background is in design, in digital design, and I did a lot of work with I worked on smart city initiatives where I was working with community collaboration, and that's one of my favorite things to do. So I think that's an early component of legacy business programs is getting the communities involved. I'd love to keep doing that. So yeah, as far as what I'm going to do, the toolkit itself is a living, growing document. I'd like to find some place for it to live in a bigger home, and I'd like for anybody that uses to contribute. Please do send me anything you'd like to add to it, anything I missed. Although I did search and found the end of the internet for this, I think there's probably other information that I have not put in there. So please do add to it.
Well, thank you very much, Ben, for taking the time to present this to us all today. Thank you all for joining. I hope that you'll spend some time in the toolkit, that you will use it, that you will share it widely, and that you'll report back to us about your success. Thank you all, and I wish you a good rest of your week. Take care.
Bye.